have members in the chamber. My name's Alison Swaddle. I'm chairing the meeting this evening. With us, we have Sam Akhtar, Rachel Burgess, Paul Fishwick, Jim Fruin, Norman Jorgensen, Sarah Kerr, Jackie Rance, and Rochelle Shepherd-Dubé. Do we have any apologies? Oh, I'll come, yeah. And as substitutes this evening, we're welcoming Chris Bowring and Anne Chadwick.
So Pauline Hillier-Simons.
And sorry, I apologise. Rebecca Margaret is here. Thank you. Right, moving to item 13, the minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Kerr has sent in some amendments. We need to add that Councillor Dennis was also present. For CS5 KPI, what is the basis of this KPI? Because 52% target is not in line with treating children in care and care leavers as our own. PG22 KPI, current data demonstrates a quarter of the original target achieved, so this KPI should be red, not green. PG26 KPI, the data should reflect the average of all the air monitors in each AQMA rather than a single monitor. Are we all happy to accept these amendments to the minutes? Thank you, members. Neil, can you make it so? Thank you. I would like to ask if anyone's got a declaration of interest. No, thank you. Moving on to public question time. Neil, do we have any questions? None this evening, thank you. I'd now like to propose that we move item 17 up the agenda to come next, if that's okay with everybody. In which case I would like to welcome John Halsall, the leader of the council, and Susan Parsonage, our chief executive, to this meeting to discuss their priorities for 2021 and 22.
Thank you. Thank you. I apologise, I'm on a phone tonight. I can't actually get my IT to work, so I apologise. So, first of all, we are a great council and a fantastic borough. We are the healthiest and most prosperous local authority in the country, whilst being the lowest funded and least deprived. This is something to be truly proud of. I would like to say that I have a magnificent, strong executive and a wonderful staff led amazingly by Susan and her team of directors. I was asked to speak about our prospects and plans. The past year has seen the council face a multitude of challenges in the face of unprecedented times. And the council and its staff has been innovative, flexible, and created new ways of working in an unparalleled environment, which you will learn from as we move forward. May I reassure everyone that working in boroughs for council's finances are sound and not prone to what has happened in Slough. Indeed, as I've said, they are in rude health. We have a good finance team in Graham Evers, Bob Watson, and Andrew with a Polish name that I can't pronounce to name but a few. Our reserves are strong as our provisions. The opposition confidently forecast our borrowings would be 750 at the end of the year. The outturn was 131 million, the vast majority of which is supported debt being either timing differences or expenditure which will be repaid by earnings or savings. The council has a clear set of priorities in the community vision and corporate delivery plan, council plan, and these were informed by our local context, and we will continue to deliver these. These are enunciated in the MTFP and the budget. We revisited the council plan in the early part of 2021 to ensure that we have taken account of the impacts of COVID, and that was agreed. A view and to see whether it stayed relevant and appropriate. During the course of 2020, despite the challenges of COVID, there were a raft of policies and strategies which were agreed in fact, it's an almost unprecedented series of policies which are published, as well as core frontline services. At the same time, as reported, a significant number of performance indicators are either green or amber. But before I do, let me just dwell on two issues. Our COVID response was superb with the voluntary sector and GPs. We were the first to protect our care homes. We had audit teams in place, food passes for the vulnerable, and speedy help to businesses and individuals. The town centre redevelopment is fantastic. We had virtually no rent voids. It's vibrant. We've delivered a cinema, bowling hall, hotel, theatre, Elmsfield, marketplace, Cantley, boxing, carnival, pool. We have a huge number of policies and plans reflecting the number of policies which have been passed in the last 2 years. We, of course, balance the budget. We have commercial thinking. We're introducing crematoria, solar farms. Our economic development is strong. We are bringing jobs to the borough. Housing, the policies are 145 plus 100, aspire to afford first-time buyers. In terms of climate change, you will see in the trees, solar energy, and, of course, behavioural change, amongst others. In terms of congestion and roads, we are continuing to build new roads, and we have the progress on the policy of intelligent traffic scheme and congestion with modal shift. Our air quality is being given increasing attention. We have the local plan coming forward, protecting our green spaces, ensuring we've got no speculative development. This year, we're also repatriating our environmental health, our trading standards and licensing, and trying to deal comprehensively with antisocial behaviour, fly tipping, and domestic violence. We will be looking at waste again, and seeing what we can do to improve that, and similarly, send and home to school transport. Within adult services, we have the introduction of ICSs, changes to Public Health England, and our own health objectives. We're looking at the operation of Optilis. You will be aware of the arts and culture strategy and the poverty strategy and equality, and this and much more. During the course of our pandemic, our partnerships were strengthened immensely, and we will build on this. We see this as a key component of a strong council. So, for example, the work with the voluntary sector and community sector, GPs and other statutory organisations. We think we have the ability to work more effectively with partnerships in the future. We will come on to that later. Moreover, there have been great steps forward on the co-production of strategies, i.e. in adults and children's, and that co-production will continue. In terms of the future, we're keen to see more work with community safety partnership at the same time as bringing the PPP in-house. As a result of the pandemic, health inequalities will be a key feature moving forward. In terms of place leadership, we have in the course of the year a strong link with all the political leaders to enable dissemination of messages. From COVID, we learnt a lot. Our knowledge about the borough and partnership, brilliant work with the community and voluntary sector, set up the one front door, improved relationships with businesses following grant allocation to local economy, engagement with vulnerable people, organisational flexibility. We switched seamlessly to online working almost overnight. We redeployed 100 people and introduced no furlough and a great adaptability to staff and temporary roles. Sourcing We sourced PPE when there was a national shortage, and we maintained services throughout. We set up an exemplary test and trace process, and we were the first to prevent hospital discharges. And this is just a few of the things that we've done and we've learned from it. In terms of bringing staff back, well, we need to think long and hard about how we do this. But for the moment, we're just going to stay as we are, and think about the business need and the well-being need. So I'll just pass you to Susan to talk about the corporate delivery plan.
Good evening, everybody. Really good to see you all. I think John's already touched on quite a few elements of the corporate delivery plan, so I'll look to pick out some of additional information that John hasn't already mentioned. So if we think about the corporate delivery plan and the key elements of that plan, one of the first elements is safe and strong communities, and within that we have safeguarding children and vulnerable people and working with partners to tackle ASB. That's what we said we would focus on. And I think in terms of achievements, and this is something we'll continue to focus on, is actually the achievement in regards to some visits that we've had recently from Ofsted and from ILACS as well. So if I can actually mention to you that we had a SEND revisit very recently, and significant progress, the statement that has been made is significant progress has been made against our statement of action. That's our SEND statement of action. At the same time, we've had an ILACS inspection very recently, a re-inspection, and that has come back in the sense that what I can say is that we're pleased with the outcome and the feedback has been very positive. So I think we set out to make improvements in terms of for children and young people, and we've had a number of revisits in the last couple of months which have actually articulated that improvement, and we're pleased with the outcome. So that, and if I sort of mention a number of other aspects as well, for example, so in terms of children's, Wokingham has set out a pledge for care leavers and a care leavers strategy which has been co-produced. So John mentioned about the co-production, and I think an element of the work that's happened and actually increased in the past 12 to 18 months is around that co-production, which is obviously really important to our communities. And something that was actually specifically mentioned from the SEND revisit was about the significant increase in the number of education, health and care plans that are completed within the timescale that they should be completed. So that was a flagged improvement in the revisit, which of course really matters for children and young people. And under this particular sphere of safe and strong communities, another aspect is the community safety strategy. John mentioned that it's been agreed by the partnership, it's been agreed by the executive. I think what was really important about it is that there's been a real depth of analysis to actually get to the point of defining those strategic ambitions. So as we move forward, what's really important is that we deliver on those strategic ambitions in the community safety strategy. And I think what we are going to do more of, and we've agreed to do more of, is actually really work more effectively with partners under the community safety partnership, because we know there's more that we can do. So, for example, we've got a whole host of task groups that sit under the partnership, and it's about how do we get those to work more effectively to get those better outcomes for our residents. And in terms of John mentioned about the reintegration of the PPP, I think what's really important here is that what we're looking to do is to maximise the deployment of our resources to meet local need and have an intelligence-led and enforcement tasking model. So So the change in terms of the PPP is about really understanding the need and having sort of solutions to tackle the community need, and have real sort of local ward-based working and more improved ward-based working, should I say. So I think that's what I want to say about that particular sphere. If I move on to the next one, which is around enriching lives under the council plan. So in another strategy where there was co-production was the adult carer strategy. And obviously John mentioned about the arts and culture strategy. So that was a new sort of strategy for the borough, and it's great that there's been wider engagement in that, and that of course will continue. And in terms of this sphere as well, we've improved our relationship with businesses, and during COVID, a lot of work has taken place with regards to businesses, and that has really helped in that relationship with the businesses in our area, and that can really inform as we move forward. So in terms of our focus in the future, so we need to implement that carer strategy. Also, we need to implement our transformation strategy in adults as well. So that's about actually what's called a strength-based practice, improving that, and then actually working on the demand management aspect of adult services. Something that John mentioned is about health inequalities. That's a big issue that will come out of COVID, and we need to ensure that is really key and part of our work as we move forward. It does link with the poverty and tackling poverty in the borough. So that's going to be key in working with the Health and Wellbeing Board and lots of other partners as well. I've talked about the arts and culture strategy, and of course it's moving forward to delivery on that. So that's a key focus for the future, because it's really important that we have a strategy and then we deliver on it. So that's what I would say about that. In terms of right homes and right places, which is another aspect of the council plan, we have the housing strategy that was actually agreed. And in terms of we look back, we've had extra care schemes that have been put in place, supportive housing schemes that have been put in place as well. And that's actually responding to the needs of more vulnerable people. John's already talked about keeping the borough moving. That's another theme in the strategy. And if I move on to the clean and green borough, so in terms of that and thinking about the future on the clean and green borough aspect of the strategy, the local plan. What's really important is that we have a robust timetable and we move forward to examination. That we really look at our role in terms of RE3 and strengthen our position in terms of RE3, and that we adopt that new waste strategy that John also mentioned, that we have a focus on waste minimisation as well. I think what's really key in this area as we move forward is we really understand more the customer interactions that are taking place, and I'll come on to customer feedback in a moment, and that we listen and learn from those customer interactions in the sphere of waste collection, for example, street cleansing, all of those services that really matter, frontline services that really matter to our residents. So it's really important that we listen and learn from those interactions and remodel our services based on the customer feedback that we're getting. So that's something that's going to be a real sort of focus as we're moving forward as well. And a further theme in the council plan is the challenging the way that we work, and that very much that customer focus is part of that. And what I can say is within the council, we have a number of key groups that have been set up where we've got officers from around the council that focus on the customer issues and the customer complaints that we have, and ensure that we've got sort of joined up solutions, and at the same time that actually will different parts of the organisation are learning from each other. I'm not saying we've solved everything, but it's about actually really understanding our complaints, really understanding what are we getting feedback about before they get to complaints as well. So that is something that obviously we will really continue to focus our attention on. And I mentioned about feedback. So in terms of last year, the executive approved investment in GovMetrics, and what that means is that for the first time we're tracking customer satisfaction via GovMetrics. So we're starting to get that information now, which is feeding into services. And what we're looking to do in the future is so build on that information, improve our website, and actually improve our data and insight. And in terms of data and insight, we've got that I'm talking about the customer satisfaction information, but at the same time, we've got all of that information that we've garnered during COVID in terms of the interaction with vulnerable people, whether that be vulnerable adults, like the interaction with businesses. All of that information really helps in really understanding our place and the people in our place. And I think the final theme in the council plan is about being the best we can be and being commercial and developing new ways of working. And of course, this was written pre-COVID. And what I can say is that John talked about the different ways that we've worked during COVID, and really the flexibility, the movement of staff to different roles, that we've tried lots of different ways to respond to COVID and actually, I'd say, push the boundaries. And that I would, we've really sort of embodied that in the way that we responded to COVID to be the best we can be. And I think that one of my CLT colleagues said that with regards to, for example, the testing that we did sort of very recently, we offered the test to over 30,000 residents, the surge testing. That he said that was a true for him. One council approach, because it was set up really quickly, and we had a superb take up in terms of the testing, well above the national average. I think over 50% in this borough. So we've got lots of examples of where there is a real sort of strong sort of one council working. Again, there's always more that we can do. We will continually strive to improve and improve, but I think that there has been sort of a great deal done in the past 12 months in terms of new ways of working. So just to finish off, what I can say is with regards to maybe some of the challenges that we have. So I think one of the challenges that John touched on in terms of was mental health and well-being. So it's the impact of COVID on families in terms of their mental health and well-being. The increase in complexity of cases that are being referred to social care and to SEND. I touched on the vulnerable adults and what we're doing with regards to adult social care. And of course, it's the impact of COVID and what that means in terms of different cases, more complex cases, additional cases, and what that means for demand. So that's a sort of another sort of challenge that we've got as well. And then moving from COVID response to actually business as usual. So those are examples of different types of challenges that we have. So I just wanted to finish there because I'm sure that you have lots of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Can I ask members for clear, direct questions to either John or Susan without making a speech? Who would like to ask a question? Okay, I can see hands going up. Let's make a note of that. I've got Chris, Sam, Anne, Rebecca, Norman, Jim, and Jackie. Okay, Chris, if you'd like to go first.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening, John and Susan. Very interesting two presentations there. I think you've actually answered the question, but I'd just like to bring out some points. I think it's generally regarded that the council and its partners and associates and volunteers have done a superb job with the COVID crisis. And I wonder, could you just point to what you think are the most important things that were decided on, the most important policies which have helped to make it such a great success?
I think, let me lead on that. The first attribute was really the command structure. We had a very short chain of command from a small group of the chief executive and the deputy chief executive and the leader and the deputy leader working through gold to silver. And it was very, very responsive. We'd already developed the partnership working with the voluntary sector and the health sector in a period before. And therefore, we were able to respond almost instantaneously to all the turns and changes which happened through the pandemic. Would you like to add to that, Susan?
I think that, as you say, John, in terms of the governance, if you like, there was a very sort of strong governance, and I think the flexibility was key to me in terms of the organisation, and then the fact that people were empowered to think about, how can we really do this differently? How can we do things differently? So it meant that what we had in place was the ability to make decisions quickly in terms of how we were responding to COVID. And at the same time, issues were quickly raised with the MPs as well through a meeting that the leader had with the MPs, and so we were raising, we were dealing with very sort of on the ground issues, but at the same time raising things through MPs and central government as well.
And I have to add that we're very fortunate to have the staff that we have, who were pretty universally prepared to change jobs, do all sorts of things, and feedback what was happening on the ground. I don't think all councils have that sort of staff which are so reactive and so with such initiative.
And maybe if I can add, John, in terms of the meeting that you had with the leaders of the opposition, the sort of the leader of the Lib Dems and Labour and Independents, in the sense of actually that communication and engagement. Yes,
what Susan's saying is that we held a meeting to clear all the issues with all the group leaders. We held a group meeting once a week, and I met with all the MPs and some ministers and some of my colleagues in other councils every week. So there was a lot of mutual assistance and appraisal and information being fed all the time. So it was an exercise which went very, very well.
Okay, thank you. So we need questions about looking forwards, things that are going to inform the scrutiny work programme for 21-22. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for John. What is the current position with the PPP?
Well, as you know, we gave notice to the PPP just before March. It was extraordinary. The contract, which wasn't drafted by us, was almost a Brexit contract in that you couldn't modify the contractual relationship. You could only terminate it. We've got a team in place to move the project forward. Project governance and resources are in place. We're moving ahead as quickly as our co-locutors allow us. The aim is to commence staffing discussions in the next 2 weeks. The new model drafted to focus on ASB, improved response to meet the needs of local communities. And discussions are continuing with West Berks and Bracknell Forest to resolve some of the disputed issues, which was expected. We're moving really at pace. I never forget that the role which we are here to perform, is serving our residents. In fact, we have no reason to be here at all if we're not serving our residents. And this whole area is to improve the response to our residents' issues as and when we can. So it's going well. Susan, would you like to add anything?
I think that what I would like to add is that from the sort of early stages, as to i.e. when the report was agreed at council, we very quickly pulled together the team that John referred to, and also the governance arrangements, so that it meant that we had the specialist knowledge around the table, and that we had the governance in place. So, and we had a clear sense of direction. So we're very clear on what needs to be done, what we need to focus our efforts on. So I think that's mainly what I wanted to add.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca.
Good evening, Susan and John. What I wanted to ask was, you claimed that by 2030, you're hoping that the council will be carbon neutral. How likely do you think that's going to be?
Well, we've not actually claimed that. The motion was fairly clear, was that we would do all that we can to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. And as you're aware, or I'm sure you're aware, that there's a series of actions that the council's taking in order to be confident that it's doing all it can. There are aspects of the climate emergency which are completely out of our hands, and we need our national government and international governments to do their bit. But in terms of the bit that we're doing, I think that's moving quite quickly ahead now, having gained momentum, and after a period of definition during the last couple of years. Susan, do you want to add anything?
I think the main thing that I would add, and is just to reiterate the point about the engagement with our local communities on the topic, and we're going to commence the deliberative process. So I think that, and obviously that's clearly very important.
Okay, thank you. What with these screens and my handwriting, I'm not quite sure if I wrote down I saw Rochelle or Rachel next. It was Rachel. Okay, thanks, Rochelle.
Thank you. I've got a question for Councillor Halsall. And it's, does he agree with me that in focusing so heavily in his opening speech on how fantastic things are, ably assisted by Councillor Bowring's question, does he agree with me that he's actually in danger of becoming overly complacent? We've got the gap between rich and poor in the borough is too high. We've got health inequality has already been mentioned, lack of affordable housing. Now it could go on. And rather than focusing on what needs to change, as Susan did in some of the policy areas that she outlined, we're given these relentlessly positive speeches. So does he agree with me that he's in danger of becoming complacent rather than focusing on what needs to change in the future for our residents?
Well, that's a political question. No, I'm unlikely at my stage in life to become complacent. I really recognise how little I know and how little I've done. Nevertheless, the policies that you enunciated in terms of poverty, for ASB, domestic violence, and the health inequalities were initiated by the leader, who happens to be me. So no, I don't agree with that at all.
Okay, thank you. Jackie.
Thank you. What are the next steps in the poverty strategy, and when do you think a strategy will emerge?
Well, we outlined our paper in January, I think it was, on the steps we were taking to establish a poverty strategy. Those steps are now in place and moving relentlessly on, and we expect to be in a position to come back to council in the late in the year. If you recall, the council's proposed approaches to poverty focused on 5 core blocks of work, which was the analysis of data inside what we do today, what else can help, voice the residents, etc. And it's all in the paper. I would say that we have an advantage. We are, as I said, it is the least deprived authority in in England, and so we should be able to focus on the families and individuals who are in deprivation in the borough. We should be able to identify them with the information that we've got, and we should be able to materially change their lives. The Gorse Ride redevelopment is probably the biggest investment in anything that we've ever done, and that is to rehouse people who are less fortunate than most in a large council estate, which was generally considered to be inadequate in this modern day, and replace them with modern and very expensive houses, given that the nature of the Gorse Ride and how we had to redevelop it. So we have done the first steps. We do need to be conscious of the fact that there are people who are less fortunate and do need help, and I think that's the mission of a local authority. So we are working through that piece of work, and that should be round about the fourth quarter of the calendar year. But we've also tacked onto that the thoughts of health disparities which have emerged particularly through the pandemic, which we also need to take on board. Does that answer, Susan? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I don't have any more.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Jim?
Thank you. Within this plan, there's some really good aspirations, and in all organisations where you have these aspirations, it's actually getting to fulfil them. What concerns me at the moment is that I can't see where looking after the mental health of residents who are suffering from the sheer level of development we've had in certain areas, and the rush to get those houses in. John, I shared with you only last week residents who are suffering every time it rains from sewage flooding. I don't see within the plan where that recovery of things that we've already done sits. Could you just guide me as to where that might be, please?
Where the recovery of things that we've done sits, I'm not entirely sure. We have a general duty to maintain the infrastructure of the borough, but there are things that we can't do and we don't do, and we can't promise to do either. For instance, sewerage is an issue for the water authority. It's not an issue for the local authority, though the local authority can apply pressure, and I hope that we have done so, and we do. But it's not an issue that we can directly deal with. in terms of mental health, from a standing start, because mental health has become a topic of really a headline topic. We've now set up a mental health charity which is funded in the borough in order to deal with the aspects of mental health which it can, much to the gratitude of our GPs. But in terms of sort of general policy, we need to take issues like those which you're dealing with on a case-by-case basis and do the best we can with them. And to be honest, when it really is outside our purview and we don't have any authority to deal with them. Do you want to add anything, Susan?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it is really important to deal with things case by case, and to say in terms of housing numbers, I mean, we have as an authority a responsibility in terms of the delivery of housing numbers. So as do councils right across the country, and that will affect, as we build, will affect residents. But in terms of actually impact, we do need to look at things on a case-by-case basis.
We did an analysis when we were looking at congestion of the causes of congestion, and it was really interesting because the popular perception that congestion is consequent upon development is false. Most of the congestion is as a result of utilities digging up for other reasons. But coming back to what Susan was saying about the local plan, Jim, we're in a rock and a hard place because those authorities who have said we're not going to have a local plan because we don't agree with it have got themselves into real problems and have had more housing thrust on them than they would have done had they had a local plan. So we must have a local plan. It's the only way that we can protect for ourselves from speculative and universal development. But also, when development is done on appeal, successfully done on appeal, it doesn't attract any infrastructure at all. So that's a huge downside. So we must have a local plan. We must build homes in the to the extent that the government requires minus a bit. I'm sure we can do a minus a bit, but the reality is it's that quantum. We're roughly on the same quantum as we've been on the plan that Gary led through the council in 10 years ago. And you mustn't forget that we have a whole cohort of people who are first-time homeowners or wish to be first-time homeowners without homes to own. So we have to do both, Jim. We have to do both. It's a feature of where we are.
Okay, thank you. Anne Chadwick.
Good evening. Could you tell us where we are with the waste strategy, please?
Yes, I think I'll start off with Susan, really, if I may.
Okay, thanks very much. So in terms of the waste strategy, we have commenced early work on a revised waste strategy, and we've got a real focus on waste minimisation and also on cost and the environmental perspective. So I think what we're looking for is the waste strategy to come forward probably around about the autumn time. And at the same time, I think I mentioned earlier on that we were going to be taking I probably didn't use these words earlier on, but we're going to be taking a deeper dive into our role in the RE3 partnership as well, to ensure that we maximise our sort of the benefits for the communities in Wokingham as well. So the work is taking place with regards to the strategy, and as I say, with a focus on waste minimisation and cost. And of course, it has to fit with the environmental plan that we've talked about as well.
So following on from Susan, we're in a partnership on waste recycling, which involves Reading and Bracknell Forest, though we collect on our own. And we are an outlier in the way that we collect, though I'm very happy to say that the introduction of the recycling bags has eliminated our losses due to wet waste. But it's become increasingly apparent that the path that we wish to tread is not necessarily in harmony with the path that our partners want to tread. So we need to work that through and see whether we can find a way which maximises our residents' benefits and maximises the service that we give to our residents, whilst not increasing the costs in a huge way.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Norman Jorgensen.
Thank you very much. John, in order to deliver on our vision, certain aspects like clean and green borough, keeping the borough moving, it seems to me that one of the key aspects in this are things like intelligent traffic scheme and the congestion strategy. When and how do you expect these to have an impact?
We have a very, very ambitious programme for intelligent transport strategy and congestion management. We are emulating the sort of scheme which is becoming more and more in urban environments, but not in semi-rural or rural environments like we have. The intelligent traffic scheme it has 4 pillars, which is free-flowing, which is a communications network, is telling everybody what's happening, getting optimization of the traffic signals, i.e. smart traffic signals, driver information, and street management, so people know where they should be going to park without having to cycle in towns. Making it smart, which is all the business about using data. We've already set up in the last 2 years a virtual control room which can manage traffic flows and measuring those in a smart censored network, but also allowing for electric vehicles and really aggressively including those electric vehicles and addressing the new and emerging technologies. It is multimodal in that we're trying to encourage bus and cycling, greenways, and lift sharing, car clubs, and all this sort of stuff, and having a travel app, and engaging with our residents and our strategic partners and such like. So I could bore you for hours on this topic, which but it's the conception of this is that it should ease the frustration of our congestion. We can't do a lot about the fact in the short term that people in Wokingham are the highest concentration of vehicles per household, and also the highest concentration of second vehicles per household in the country. So we're not going to get people out of their cars quickly, notwithstanding the fact that I have a huge post box, like I'm sure Pauline does, of people who are saying we should turn all the roads into cycleways. But we are creating cycleways, we are creating greenways, and the programme should improve the ability to move in the borough and also lower the pollution as a consequence of reducing the traffic jams. When will it happen? I think it'll half of it will be done this municipal year, and the other half will be done the next new municipal year. Anything to add there, Susan?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you. Okay, Sarah Kerr.
Thank you. The point of this agenda item is actually the horizon scanning, so that we understand what's coming up in order to inform our scrutiny agenda going forward. Just for Councillor Chadwick's benefit, the waste strategy is actually coming to our next meeting in September. There are
just to point out that Councillor Chadwick is subbing tonight.
Yeah, she's got an agenda though. So there's a couple of things I wanted to find out a little bit more about and when they'll be ready. So firstly, you mentioned the customer interaction side of things, particularly with frontline services. And as I'm sure we can all attest, for the majority of our residents, it's these frontline services that are what our residents see as the council, particularly things like grass cutting, waste collection, state of the roads and things like that. So what I'd like to understand, so there's obviously a piece of work going on there. What I'd like to understand is when that will be in a position where it will be ready to come to this scrutiny committee so that we can input into that process, please, preferably early on and potentially further on, so we actually get to input into the overview aspect and set the direction. And at the scrutiny stage, when something's a little bit more robust, that we can influence before it goes to executive. Next to that, I'd also like to understand about this work you're talking about, the community safety partnership and how we're working more effectively there. I'm assuming this covers the antisocial behaviour side of things, which is something that's coming up a lot from residents at the moment. And I also think the domestic abuse and violence comes under that as well. So I'd like to understand again when that's going to be in a position that we can input into it at both the overview and scrutiny stages, please. And one other thing, just based on the last thing that John was just saying there about the high car ownership, you'll probably remember the motion that was passed last year, where one of the things is developing a car club strategy, which will help decrease the level of car ownership in the borough. And it's something that this council agreed to. I've not seen anything further about that. So I'd like to also know when the car club strategy is going to be in a position that it can come to scrutiny as well, please. Thank you.
Well, there's about 40 questions there.
It was three areas.
And let me remind you that overview and scrutiny is not a decision-making body. It is a revisal chamber, if you like. And so we're very happy to have policies come to scrutiny when they've been actually determined. Certainly, it's not the role for scrutiny to do it before they've been determined.
Can I just clarify? So it's an overview and scrutiny function. We are not able to decide on policy, but we're able to influence and make recommendations. Thank you.
Indeed, you can. So in the melee of what you said, Sarah, I think you were talking about car clubs. I've no idea when, if we're going to influence the car clubs at the moment. And I can't remember exactly what else you asked in that.
Shall I come
Susan,
in?
want to come in?
Yes, please, Susan.
Can I come in on that? So just in terms of Sarah, where you raised about customer and customer feedback. So what we're in a position of right now is that what we're getting is better granular data. So we haven't been in a position where we've got that sort of like that granular data, and it's as a result of a system, like a system that we've bought. So what I would say is that we are at the moment starting to collect that information, and at the same time, what we're doing as well is identifying where there are gaps in the collection of that information as well. So so we know we've got a system, so that's when the resident calls our customer services and customer delivery. You know, when that's called, then we get that information about and customer feedback. So we're looking at where there are gaps as well, and whether that be via our suppliers or our contractors, you know, that kind of thing. So I think if I can sort of take it away in terms of you asking about sort of a timescale, if I can take it away and come back about actually when we will have information which is where it's something which can be scrutinised in an effective way, because we've just started to collect that information now. So and then secondly, your point about the antisocial behaviour strategy, you're right, that is on the agenda for the community safety partnership, and one of the actions is to actually have an antisocial behaviour strategy, because like many things, it's not saying that we've got to have lots and lots of long strategies, but because I think it's really important to have short strategies and long in action, and it's so. But it's absolutely something that we've said that we will do as a community safety partnership. This was discussed at the last partnership meeting. That we're so the scope is going to be defined at the next community safety partnership or very soon in terms of the scope of that. I mean, you're right to say that antisocial behaviour is you know, very important to lots of residents, and we see the PPP and actually bringing back the PPP along and an aspect to that as well as other things too. So it will be for the I would say for the community safety partnership to actually come back on what the thinking is about whatever's agreed there in terms of the how things would how and when done. Similarly, I would say with domestic violence, because as I know, you would know, that absolutely falls squarely under the community safety partnership, because the effective tackling of DV cuts across a whole host of organisations. So it's the same sort of principle there in terms of actually it's a draft strategy that will go to the community safety partnership. So what we can do is again, I can take that away in terms of the scrutiny aspect of that, in terms of ASB and DV as well.
Thank you. Can I just ask?
I would also add that what we're trying to do with the community safety partnership is what we've done successfully with the voluntary sector, and we did successfully with the GPs, is bring the community safety partnership as part of our normal working with officers and teams which are resolving problems. Historically, the legislation for antisocial behaviour and domestic violence was actually with the PPP, which was curious because it's not something that they could enact. But it also, I would add, Sarah, that if you've got these questions, it's best to ask them executive members and me on an ongoing basis, rather than just sort of save them up to on this part of the overview and scrutiny.
So the whole point of this agenda item is for the horizon scanning, and that's the whole point. And so Susan has very kindly gone through what's coming up on the agenda, and I've picked up on some things that aren't currently in our forward programme, but I'd like to understand at what point they can slot into our forward programme. So I don't understand what the problem is. Could I ask Susan that after this meeting, are you okay to liaise with Neil about the timeframes of the customer interaction work that's going on, the ASB and the DV work as well, so that we can understand where we can put those into our agenda where appropriate, please?
Yeah, what I need to do with, in particular with regards to DV and ASB, is also talk to the Community Safety Partnership as well, because they are ultimately in the same way that with the Community Safety Partnership, it's a partnership. You know,
Yep.
it's really important that it's a partnership owned sort of strategy. So, because that's where we get the biggest impact is when when it's a sort of true partnership. So I just need to take that away.
No, I totally agree. And just finally, it was just on the car club strategy. Do we know where that is and where that's likely to come to one of the scrutiny committees?
I don't know. I'd need to find out about that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Paul Fishwick.
Thank you. Over the next 3 years, WBC is planning on spending 17 million on improvements to traffic flow and easing congestion. Transport evidence shows that around 60% of car journeys are only up to 5 kilometres. Investment in sustainable travel, such as walking and cycling, can accommodate a large proportion of these short journeys. Yet WBC is only investing 5.8 million in a strategic walking and cycling improvement programme. So when will this committee see plans to scrutinise modal shift to sustainable travel? Thank you.
Let me say, these things aren't determined by the amount of investment, Paul, as you know, and so I think you'll find that in our MTFP anyway.
That hasn't answered my question. My question was, when will this committee see plans to scrutinise modal shift to sustainable travel?
I have no running of this committee.
So how is this council going to change the shift from driving a car to walking and cycling and using public transport? Where's your models to show that? When are we going to scrutinise it?
The question of when you're going to scrutinise it is a question for you, Paul. And I think that the policies that we've already enunciated are stuff that you can scrutinise.
So what you're saying, John, is that you've got traffic modelling, which is available for sustainable travel and changing modal shift from car journeys to walking and cycling with the investment that you've putting in the next 3 years.
Paul, you are very typical of the opposition, that you see everything in spending terms. Behavioural change is not necessarily a spending
I am
issue.
Not doing that at all. I'm talking from a transport engineering perspective. I have worked in this profession for 43 years. Where is the modelling for it? That modelling is available. I think this committee should be able to see it.
I think I've answered the question.
Okay, thank you. Rochelle, do you have a question? Because we've sort of gone over the time we'd allocated for this item.
John, you claim that all of the congestion is caused by utilities, not the new homes. I went down the Reading Road this evening and the traffic goes bumper to bumper. There were no construction at all whatsoever by utilities. Have you tried actually driving during school run. I'm sorry, but all these new cars are coming from somewhere. They're not dropping out of the sky. They're coming from.
Sorry, do you have a question, Rochelle?
Yes. What are you planning to do to reduce the congestion on the road?
As I said, we have a congestion and an integrated transport strategy. No, I didn't claim that all the traffic jams were from utilities. That's what you said. I didn't say that. So don't put words in my mouth. Thank you.
Would you like to hear the recording?
Okay. Thank you very much, John and Susan, for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Going back to item going back to item 16 on the agenda, we do have a member's question, but he's unable to be present.
Now
so
exiting.
he will be sent a written answer. Thank you for doing that, Neil. Right, item 18 is the community deliberative processes. Now, you've all been sent these papers. I hope they've all been read, so we don't need a presentation of that again. We're being joined this evening by Diana Tovar and Grant Thornton. And we're being asked in that paper to note this. So if members have any specific questions that they need for clarification, this will be going to the executive in July, but the application for funding won't be going to the executive until October. Rachel.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to see that the public engagement on this is now being taken very seriously. But at the outset, we need to consider, what is the key aim of this process? What are we trying to do here at the end of the day? We're trying to save carbon. That's always got to be our focus. But if you look at the methodology in here, does it focus on that? No, I don't think it does. None of the measurements here relate to the effectiveness of outcomes in terms of actually reducing carbon. Instead, we're focusing on things like cost and how long things will take. I would add at the bottom of page 20 in the pack says that the focus on engaging with the public is to lead to behavioural change, and I would disagree with that. The point should,
Rachel,
yeah,
do you have a question for Diana?
I do, yeah. The point is that the tough decisions need to be made by the council to save carbon, and that citizens, but not politicians, should be the ones informing those decisions. So I think it sort of missed the point. In terms of detailed questions, the weightings, I wanted to pick up on the weightings, because the weightings sort of skew the report. We've decided in here that the cost of it and the length of process are actually more important to the council than, say, whether you have a wide variety of people from all demographics participating, or whether there's proper discussion about these very complex issues. So in terms of the question, I think with these weightings, we're bound to come up, in my view, with the finding that actually a cheap, sort of quick, easy way of consulting is best. So I'd like to ask, why have we done the weightings in that way? Why have we put so much emphasis on the cost and the length of time that something will take, that this will take, and less importance on the variety of people participating and the detailed information and discussion that these options might provide?
Okay. Hi, good afternoon. So what we try to achieve with this options appraisal and the methodology assessment is to provide kind of a value to the different to the key elements for engaging the community. So we look at the costs, how long will the process will take, and we understand that all these elements are important, but what we're trying to achieve is that these are that the method that we use is cost effective, so that we engage as many members of the community as we can, but at the same time, that is a process that can be delivered in a considerable amount of time, and that it doesn't cost a considerable amount of money.
Okay, could I just come back on that? And I would say I disagree with those weightings for the reasons I've outlined. Could I also just pick up another detailed question about the scoring? Is that okay? So actually the scoring is incorrectly calculated. So there are errors in the multiplication in the length of process column in table 4. So the length of process has a weighting of 4, but that entire column has actually been multiplied by 5. Also, there's a couple of other incorrect calculations in the conversation cafe. So if those numbers could be re-looked at and updated correctly. But in terms of the actual scorings, I would disagree with a couple of them. I'd like your sort of explanations on those. So again, focusing on table 3, focus groups have been graded 5 for discussion potential. But how can residents have a meaningful discussion without a proper learning and understanding of the issues first? And that's one of the great values actually of a citizens' assembly, is that the first stage is learning for participants so they have a fuller picture before they start. And the other one I wanted to pick up was citizens' assembly itself has been scored 1 for communication of results. But we've seen in the pack that the Camden example, that the results were translated into a climate plan that was then unanimously voted on by that council. You know, they've already been through this whole process and voted on a plan based on this very method. So, you know, we're a bit late to the party on this. So I'd like to know why we've only scored 1 for that, because to me it doesn't make sense. Thank you.
Okay, so on the question about the focus groups, we why we assigned higher values for the engagement of participants is related to, I mean, with the focus groups, we will the process will involve having also experts informing and external facilitators supporting the activity, and it doesn't the process does not take as long as the kind of sort of training and education that a citizens' assembly takes, because you have to, as you pointed out, you have to educate the participants in the specific subjects. The other question, the other value that you ask about citizens' assembly in terms of the feedback detail, the reason why we gave it a lower value is because collecting all the ideas is the length of the process that takes to produce to collect all the ideas, to analyze them, and to get the participants to vote on those it's quite resource intensive. It takes a lot of time. So it's more of the time, no in terms of the value of the feedback. The value of the feedback is very valuable, but it's about the amount of time that it takes into putting the information together and the recommendations in a report.
Okay, thank you. I would say, you know, these are really complex, difficult discussions, so they deserve complex, difficult, lengthy conversations. Could I just ask one further question, Chair? The last one.
I do have other members that do want to ask questions, Rachel.
So is that no?
Yes. Sarah.
Thank you. I just wanted to start with a particular line of inquiry. Can I ask how you're defining deliberative processes, please?
Well, the process to allow the community to come together and to discuss on a topic that will affect, that will have impact on the future, where they have information and where they're given the opportunity to feedback into what any decisions will feedback into the impact of those decisions.
Okay, then can I ask why there's a number of methods in here that aren't deliberative? They're more sort of raw opinion gathering tools, and in fact, most of them that are in that table that have been assessed aren't deliberative processes. So why have they been included in that? I mean, this whole thing, the title of the document is Community Deliberative Processes, but when you actually go into the report, it says community engagement, and that's not the same thing.
Well, this study is based on what we have identified other local authorities have done to engage with climate emergency. And not all the processes that have been used are specifically about bringing the community to deliberate on climate emergency. They have been supported by activities as surveys and requesting feedback. So what we try to do is to identify the different methods that have been used across different local authorities and assess those different mechanisms.
Okay, because it's confusing, because this was supposed to be specifically a report on the different deliberative processes that are available to this authority that it can use to set the agenda for our actions for addressing the climate emergency, and get that wider participation. Yet we have very few deliberative processes in there. We have a load of community engagement in there. I mean, Rachel's already picked up on the point that the weighting in the methodology actually puts that discussion element really weighted low. I must admit, I won't lie, I'm not impressed with the report at all, and it wasn't what I was expecting at all. It doesn't even set the objective of this. I appreciate that we're going to be doing community engagement alongside this, and we should be doing it, but this seems to be more of an assessment of community engagement and not the very specific deliberative process. There was just a couple of other things that I wanted to inquire, I'm a bit confused. I mean, you put a lot of weighting onto cost. Firstly, have you actually looked at the external funding available? Because several other local authorities have done things like citizens' assemblies and juries, and they've actually been able to secure funding to cover the cost of those. And that obviously has an influence then on the weighting that you've applied to this, if that's possible. I'm also a little bit confused by some of the weighting because there hasn't been a decision yet as to whether you're going to reimburse members of the community to be involved. And my understanding and what I've seen through all the case studies, and I looked at other case studies because actually there's no case studies on here for the two methods that you've actually selected, which I found very unusual. But they do tend to give vouchers and things to people. So that's not been taken into account. So I'd like to know,
Sarah,
I'd like to know if there's been, if you've looked at external funding. I'd like to know what conversations you've had with the national organisation involved that are experts in this. And finally, specifically on focus groups, it says on page 22 that this method will allow targeting relevant stakeholders to join specific workshops on a topic that they may specialise or have an interest in. What concerns me there is we're supposed to have more of a random selection rather than sort of cherry picking people. So I'd like to understand why we're not doing more of that random selection that's more reflective of the wider community, please. Thank you.
Sarah, could I just, if you want to bring this back to ONS to look at the financial implications and funding, that's because that doesn't go to executive until October.
Yeah, but my point is that weighting has been given based on finances here, but I don't think full understanding of that has been done yet.
Okay. Diana and Grant?
In terms of how we look at financing available, yes, we have, but we haven't found any financing for specifically supporting this project. So, I mean, we're constantly looking at grants and support that will allow us to support this area. So, yes, we haven't found it as to this point. Grant?
You're on mute, Grant.
Too late. What we've presented here, and I think it will always be possible to disagree with particular weightings, but the methodology that's been applied is very transparent and very clear. If there are issues around that, then we can pick those up and have a conversation about those. I think what's important, though, is that what we've created here is like a balanced scorecard where we're trying to balance out different dimensions of benefit and cost and resources. So it's very transparent and it's a balanced scorecard. What we're not saying here is that we are excluding ideas around ensuring that the responses that we get are representative of our communities. We haven't said that's not going to happen. The fact that focus groups allow people to follow their interests doesn't necessarily mean that we're cherry picking, and it doesn't mean that we're excluding people or not seeking to have a representative discussion. So what we've got here is a balanced scorecard that guides us in terms of what the organisation may best be able to support. And I take the semantic point about the difference between community engagement and deliberative processes. But what we're trying to look at here is how we can best engage with our citizens to best influence the climate change agenda. And what we haven't done yet is apply further thoughts and thinking. So things like the finances are yardsticks, based on the costs of exercises carried out elsewhere. So the detail about whether vouchers or incentives are there, that will come out when we look at it in more detail. But I think the point for me is what we've tried to do is in a very transparent way, try and help guide the organisations how to best it can take forward the engagement of citizens in the climate emergency agenda.
Okay, just one quick point. I wouldn't call it semantics, the difference between deliberative process and community engagement. If we were expecting a community engagement plan, then fine, we weren't. We were expecting something very specific to how we have a deliberative process on the overarching thing here, and that's not what we've been presented with tonight.
Paul.
Thank you. Quite a number of my questions have already been covered by Rachel Burgess and a few by Sarah as well. I think there's a few which weren't covered by either of them. Page 46 to 48 covers the case studies, and you've recommended the focus groups, but not provided any case study evidence or information on those at all. Why not? How do you know the costs were low to medium on focus groups, but then you've only estimated £1,000? And what is medium cost? Is that up to 10K? Because then when you compare that with ePanel, where the costs are estimated at low to medium, you then rated that at 4, which is up to 5. So you've got inconsistencies all the way through this chart. That impacts on tables 2 to 4. And if it is medium, up to 10K, then the rating would be 3. And then that puts further errors in that table itself. So the table, it's got so many significant errors in it, it shouldn't be relied upon as any evidence that focus groups are the right way forward. It needs to be really looked at again properly, all of this.
Okay, so just to answer your first question, we couldn't find any case studies or focus groups being used specifically for climate emergency, and that's why we didn't include one of those in the report. In terms of what you suggest on reviewing the scoring, we can revisit that. I mean, that's fine. But as Graham pointed out, this is just kind of a scorecard to assess the different methodologies against different parameters. Yeah.
If I could just come back on one point you made there about focus groups and climate change, you don't need to find a case study based on climate change. You've actually got a couple of your case studies were based on other items, such as Guildford Borough Council with their town centre, which was not climate change at all. So you didn't need to find every single time a climate change one.
Yeah, is that the ones that have an element to sustainability and environmental improvements. So.
Okay, Rochelle.
Citizens' assemblies are one of the best ideas normally in most places for climate change. It includes education of participants. Isn't that better to actually have knowledgeable people who can go out in the community and tell other members what they learned? I just don't understand all of the stuff that's going on here. It looks like you already decided on focus groups and then try to figure out how to justify that. I've been involved in focus groups before. It's mostly in trying to sell people something in another or change the packaging on something to make it more pleasant to people. It's not designed to change attitudes as far as that goes. So I'm just trying to figure out why you picked this in particular. And since there's no examples of using focus groups, how the heck can you say it's going to work?
Well, we are not saying that none of these methods are good or bad. I mean, if you look at the scorecard and the scoring table, all of them are really good methods used for engaging the community and for bringing that deliberative process. And we didn't pick one method and then score against all of those. I mean, that's not the objective of this process. Yes, citizens' assemblies is very popular because it creates, is a long process that educates the community, but actually it's not the community, it's the participants. So we're talking, they're bringing, we're talking about a group of 50 to 100 participants that get the benefit to sit down with experts on the subject and to talk about, so they can produce recommendations that are supported by a more informed environment, but we're talking about also a reduced group. It's not that we are educating all all the residents. And if you looked at what some of the case studies that we use, that use citizens' assemblies, they don't only base on the citizens' assembly to support to inform the climate emergency action plans. They supported that using other methods, because still citizens' assemblies, I mean, it produced recommendations, but it's from a small group of people. So they supported that by bringing surveys and more information from the wider community.
Focus groups are smaller than citizens' assemblies, so therefore they have even less people that would give you the opinions. Focus groups are very rarely more than about a dozen people.
Okay, thank you, members. Right, we were asked to note the review that's been undertaken.
Chair. Sorry, Chair, could I ask my final question? Sorry, Chair, could I ask my final question? Could I ask my final question?
Is it a direct question?
It's a question about the criteria used.
Okay, you may ask a question.
Thank you. So I think there's 3 criteria that are missing here, and I'd like to understand why. The first is to do with informing residents. So we've heard about the learning process that we go through in a citizens' assembly, and a lot less of that happens, say, with a focus group. So I'd like to understand why that isn't in there as one of the criteria. Secondly, there's no criterion in here for the ability of each option to actually set policy. And I'd like to understand why that isn't in there. A focus group can basically listen to and then, take it or leave it. But say a citizens' assembly actually used to set policy. And thirdly, in terms of the demographics of the group. So say citizens.
Rachel, did you have one question?
Yeah, so it's those 3 criteria in terms of representation, informed decisions, and the ability to set policy. Why aren't those included as criteria in this report? If they were, citizens' assemblies would come out top, no question.
Okay, so in terms of informing the community from the result of the process, I think the criteria probably is not, I'm not sure it's not clear, but one of the parameters is communication of results, and is actually in part of the criteria that we use to in the report. The other part of the criteria you mentioned is about setting policy. None of these methods specifically set policy. What they do is they produce recommendations, and that's exactly what, for example, you use citizen assemblies as an example. What we saw in our research is the citizen assembly. The outcome is a report with a list of recommendations that are presented to council and then voted in or out in terms of support. So they are not setting policy, and that's why it's not a criteria that we included. And I'm sorry, I missed the last one.
It was to do with how representative the people involved are. So obviously, you know, with a focus group of 6 people, you're not going to get a statistically representative sample. So why hasn't that been included in terms of assessing like the democratic legitimacy of each option?
Well, there is one of the criteria that we use called participant variation, and it's about how varied and what sort of engagement from multiple sources can be obtained. So I think that covers that.
Okay, thank you, Diana. Members, are we happy to note this review? Yeah, if I could see a show of hands. All in favour of noting this review? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Thank you. Any abstentions or any against?
I actually wanted to make a recommendation, if possible, please.
Sorry, who was that? You're all putting your hands up. So, Sarah?
Yes, I wanted to make a recommendation for the committee to vote on, and that is this committee has significant reservations related to this report and does not recommend its approval as executive.
Okay, do you have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. Right, well, did all members hear the proposal? We'll take that to a vote. Those in favour? Okay, and those against? Okay, I'm afraid that's fallen, Sarah. Moving on to the next item. We're looking at item 19, the establishment of a tree and biodiversity protection task and finish group. We discussed this at our previous meeting. We need to have political balance on this. I would propose that it has 5 members, 3 Conservatives. I understand there's a Liberal Democrat interested, and then either somebody from the Independent or the Labour group, or do both of them have a group member who wishes to be on this task and finish? Rachel?
Yeah, we can submit a member for that, yeah.
But you want to have a member on this?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Jim?
Yes.
Right. We know. We need to go through them.
Chair, I'd be happy to relinquish our place if Jim would like to take it. That's fine.
Thank you, Rachel. Right, okay, so I would propose the task and finish group has 5 members. I know from climate emergency this has been a very successful model. 3 Conservatives, 1 Liberal Democrat, and 1 Independent.
Sorry, could I interrupt? I'm so sorry. Has it already been established that this task and finish group should go ahead? Because I find the wording almost meaningless. I've no idea what it's supposed to be doing. It's got no aim. It just wants to protect trees and biodiversity. It's like mother love and apple pie. I think we can all agree with that. Sure, when it comes into conflict with development, because that's where the interest occurs. But if you've already approved it at a previous meeting, then obviously I accept that.
Chair, we discussed this at quite some length back in March.
Yeah, that's right. And the terms of reference would be agreed by the task and finish members.
So it says to consider the establishment. That means to consider whether it should exist. Before you put members on it, you need to determine whether it should go ahead or not. It's my reading of the item.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the minutes of the last meeting, so I thought we did agree that in June. At the minute. Where is it in the June minute?
May I suggest it's a slight error of wording in this agenda because this has definitely been agreed in March.
Do you have a recommendation you wanted to make about this, Chris?
I was just, well, I don't think I'm in favour of establishing this group, at least on the description that's been provided in front of me. I mean, I'm only subject tonight, so I haven't seen previous meetings, and maybe there was more information there, and maybe you already resolved something.
Yeah, it was
all I've got is
previously,
about
and
15 words in front of me, which doesn't really say anything at all. I think a little more information. I would need more information to agree to support the setting up of this task and finish group.
Well, the principle in March was agreed to look at the council's tree policy, and then the addition of biodiversity was proposed in June. Sarah?
There were two things: to look at the tree policy as a separate thing that comes to the whole committee, and the establishment of the task and finish group. It was decided after the 450 trees were felled at Bearwood Lakes, and while it's not specifically about that, that's obviously was to be used as a case study to look at how we protect further trees in areas of biodiversity from being destroyed, because you know it's all very well planting all these trees, but we're losing them at an alarming rate, and that was the point in doing that deep dive exercise, which we agreed at in March. So tonight's job was just to set it up, really, and select members and go forward with it.
Yeah, if you look at page 15, it does state that as agreed at the meeting on the 23rd of March, inclusion in our work programme for this year was this group, which would be discussed tonight about how to set it up.
Yeah, well, of course, I accept your ruling, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Right. I would like this task and finish group to be open to any members of the council, not simply those who are members of ONS committees. So if we have it on the basis of 5 members, 3 Conservatives, 1 Liberal Democrat and 1 Independent, are we all happy to move forward with that group being established on that basis? Yes? Right. So if we can, we will promote that to all members. Obviously, it's a group decision who is going to represent your group in that. And then the task and finish panel members can set the the terms of reference and agree amongst themselves when they'll have their first meeting. And I believe it's going to be supported by Neil. Is that all okay, Neil? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Moving on. Item 20, we're looking at the current executive and individual executive member decision forward programmes. Has anyone got any comments on those? Sarah.
So it's just one little query. In the last meeting, I asked about the procurement strategy that was coming up. It's obviously too late now, but we were trying to establish whether this was just a tweak or if this was a whole new procurement strategy, and we were going to have a look at it if it was something a bit more robust. But I've not heard anything further. Did we find out anything about that at all?
Yes, it's not a tweak. We don't really have a procurement strategy as such, I'm told. So this is a bit more fundamental.
So the agreement was last time, if that was the case, it was supposed to come to this committee meeting for us to scrutinise before going to executive. Why didn't that happen?
I'm not sure that the committee did agree that. I think the committee asked for more clarification.
With a view that if it was more in-depth, that it would be scrutinised by us.
Well, I can only apologise if that was the committee's intention, but it's not here tonight, and obviously it's going to executive at the end of the month.
Any other comments on the executive member decisions and forward programme? Thank you. Item 21, the committee work programmes. Guy's not here this evening. HOSC hasn't met since, well, we're meeting on Monday, so we haven't met since the last meeting of this management committee. Norman, is there anything you want to say about children's services?
Just briefly, I think everybody was in agreement, I think, with the forward programme. We've got quite a number of items throughout the year, so I think it will keep us busy.
Thank you. Looking at what we've got on the programme for the next meeting in September, we're looking at the COVID response, the KPI for the first quarter, and options to make the report more streamlined and timely. That originally was supposed to come to this meeting, but I'm afraid the report wasn't ready, which is why it's being put off till September. We will be looking at the waste strategy and looking at the website, service delivery channels and customer service. Is there anything else urgent that anyone wanted bringing forward or to look at the October or later meetings? No. Thank you very much. Looking at the action tracker, don't believe there's anything to update on that. As I just said, the Q3 performance report options, that's been moved from June to September. No. Anybody got any comments on the action tracker? Nope. Thank you very much. We will close the meeting at 8:40 and just in time for half time. Thank you very much. Good night.